The bank statement in my trembling hands showed a balance of $847.32. 3 days ago, it was $180,000. I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, maybe 2 weeks left if I'm lucky. But that's not what's killing me right now. What's killing me is staring at transaction after transaction, all authorized by the one person I trusted with everything, my son Michael. $45,000 for a Tesla, $12,000 for a weekend in Vegas, $8,500 for a Rolex, all while I was unconscious in the ICU fighting for my life. And he's been visiting me every single day since, holding my hand, whispering, "I love you, Dad," while I recovered, asking about my funeral arrangements, promising to take care of my affairs. My name is Robert Mitchell, 67 years old, worked construction for 43 years, saved every penny I could. 2 jobs, no vacations, wore the same boots for a decade, all so I could leave something behind for the son who used to call me his hero. The son who, at this very moment, is probably spending my money on another luxury I'll never live to see. But here's what Michael doesn't know. I'm not as helpless as he thinks, and I'm not as close to death as my doctors believe. See, when you discover that your own flesh and blood has been robbing you while you're dying, something inside you changes. The machines around my bed aren't just keeping me alive, they're giving me time. Time to do something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Yesterday, when he sat next to my bed and asked if I needed anything, I looked into his eyes. The same eyes that used to look up at me with pure love when he was 5 years old. And I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. "Dad, you look worried about something," he said, squeezing my hand with the same fingers that had been typing in authorization codes to drain my life savings. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and demand answers. Instead, I smiled and whispered, "I'm just thinking about your inheritance, son, about what you'll do with it when I'm gone." The way his face lit up, God, it nearly broke what was left of my heart. But that moment also gave me an idea, a final lesson that would cost him everything he'd stolen and so much more. You see, dying doesn't make you powerless. Sometimes it makes you dangerous. What I did next didn't just get my money back. It exposed who my son really was to everyone he cared about. His wife, his colleagues, his children, and it left him with a choice that would define the rest of his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how a father's love can turn into something much darker when betrayal runs this deep. You need to know about the 4 a.m. phone call that changed everything, the hidden camera I installed, and the one person Michael never suspected would help me destroy him. Because this isn't just about money, it's about justice. It's about what happens when you bet against a dying man who has nothing left to lose. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you'd die for, if you've ever wondered how far you'd go to make things right, then you need to hear what happened in the 13 days between that bank statement and my son's complete downfall. Hit that like button if you believe in justice, even when it comes at the ultimate cost. Share this if you've ever felt the sting of family betrayal. And subscribe, because over the next 10 episodes, I'm going to tell you exactly how I made my son pay for every stolen dollar, and why, even now, I'm not sure I can forgive myself for what I did to him. Trust me, you've never heard a father's revenge story like this one. Wednesday, 6:47 a.m., room 314, St. Mary's Hospital. The morphine drip wasn't working anymore. Nothing could numb what I was seeing on that bank statement. My life's work reduced to 3 digits and loose change. The paper crinkled in my shaking hands as I read each transaction again, hoping my cancer-addled brain had somehow misunderstood. But there it was, clear as the IV needle in my arm. Systematic theft by my own blood. Michael walked in at exactly 8 a.m., like he had every morning for 3 weeks. Same concerned expression, same gentle voice asking about my pain levels, same hands that had authorized every transaction now reaching for mine in false comfort. I watched him perform his caring son routine, this man I'd raised, this stranger wearing my child's face. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" His voice carried that practiced sympathy healthcare workers use with terminal patients. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Here was my son asking about my well-being while systematically draining my accounts. The same son who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants. "Better," I lied, tucking the bank statement under my pillow. "Much better." He smiled, that same crooked grin he'd inherited from his mother. But now it looked predatory, calculating. "That's great, Dad. The doctors said your numbers are improving." Numbers. Everything came down to numbers now. The numbers on my blood tests. The numbers counting down my remaining days. The numbers disappearing from my bank account. Michael squeezed my hand, and I felt the weight of his Rolex against my wrist. $8,500 of my money ticking against my skin. "I've been thinking about after," he continued, settling into the chair he'd claimed as his own, "about the funeral arrangements, the house, your finances. I want to make sure everything is handled properly." The audacity was breathtaking. He was planning my funeral with money he'd already spent, discussing my house while probably calculating its sale price, managing my finances that he'd already redistributed into his own accounts. Every word was a knife twist, and he didn't even know I was bleeding. "That's thoughtful of you, son." The word son felt like poison in my mouth now. "I've always been able to count on you." If he caught the edge in my voice, he didn't show it. Michael had always been good at hearing only what he wanted to hear. A useful trait for a thief, I supposed. He stayed for exactly 43 minutes. I'd started counting. Then left with promises to return tomorrow. Same time, same performance. Alone again, I pulled out the bank statement and studied it like a battle plan. Because that's what this had become. A war between a dying father and the son who was already spending his inheritance. But Michael had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was too weak to fight back. He was about to learn that dying men have nothing left to lose, and that makes them the most dangerous enemies of all. Thursday, 2:15 a.m., the darkness before dawn. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when my mind was spinning with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The hospital corridors were tomb quiet at this hour, broken only by the steady beep of machines keeping people alive, including me, including the man who was about to destroy his own son. I'd raised Michael to believe in consequences. Every broken rule had a price. Every lie had a reckoning. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned that rules didn't apply to him. That other people's money was just an opportunity waiting to be seized. That his dying father was nothing more than an inconvenience delaying his inheritance. The phone call to my lawyer, Patricia Vance, had been enlightening. Even at 2 a.m., she'd listened to my situation with professional calm. 40 years of practicing estate law had apparently prepared her for every family betrayal imaginable. Within an hour, she'd outlined a strategy that would make Michael's theft look like child's play. "Your son has access to your accounts how exactly?" she'd asked. "Power of attorney. I signed it when they first admitted me. Thought I was being responsible, preparing for the worst. The irony wasn't lost on me. My attempt at good parenting had enabled his theft." "Robert, what you're planning, it's legal, but it's cruel. Are you certain you want to go this far?" Cruel. As if stealing from a dying man wasn't cruel. As if visiting your father every day while robbing him blind wasn't the ultimate cruelty. Michael had redefined the word for me. Now I was simply returning the favor. By 3 a.m., the framework was in place. By 4 a.m., I'd made the calls that would set everything in motion. By 5 a.m., I'd sent the emails that would involve the one person Michael could never suspect, his wife, Sarah. Sarah, who had no idea her luxury lifestyle was funded by her father-in-law's deathbed accounts. Sarah, who would be devastated to learn that her husband had been lying to her for months. Sarah, who would become my unwitting accomplice in her own husband's destruction. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Michael had stolen my money expecting a dead man's silence. But dead men don't need bank accounts. They don't need credit ratings or social standing. They don't need their son's love or respect. Living men do. And that difference would cost Michael everything. I'd spent 43 years building a life, a reputation, a legacy. Michael had dismantled it in 3 weeks, thinking there would be no consequences. He was about to learn that consequences don't die with their victims. Sometimes they multiply. The sun was rising outside my window, painting the hospital room gold and orange. A new day. The first day of Michael's reckoning. He'd arrive at 8 a.m. with his concerned face and caring words, having no idea that his father had spent the night becoming his enemy. I closed my eyes and tried to find some remnant of the love I'd felt for him. It was still there, buried under layers of rage and betrayal. But it was changing, becoming something harder, something that could watch its own child suffer and call it justice. Maybe that made me as much of a monster as him. Maybe that's what family does to us in the end, turns us into mirror images of each other's worst qualities. But if I was going to be a monster, I was going to be a thorough one. Friday, 10:30 a.m. The conversation that changed everything. Sarah arrived alone. That was my first victory, getting her here without Michael knowing. She looked tired, older than her 34 years. Marriage to a thief, even an undiscovered one, has a way of aging people prematurely. I wondered what stress she'd been carrying, what lies she'd been believing. "Robert, you sounded so urgent on the phone. Is everything okay?" She settled into the visitor's chair, her designer purse, probably paid for with my money, resting against her knees. "Sarah, I need to show you something. But first, I need you to promise me you'll hear me out completely before you react." The bank statements spread across the hospital bed like evidence at a crime scene. Which, I supposed, they were. Sarah's eyes moved across the pages, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to horror. The exact progression I'd experienced, but compressed into minutes instead of hours. "I don't understand," she whispered, but her voice said she understood perfectly. "The Tesla you've been driving, the vacation to Hawaii last month, the Rolex Michael's been wearing, the furniture you bought for the living room." I pointed to each transaction. "All of it came from my life savings, Sarah. All of it was stolen while I was unconscious in the ICU." She was shaking now, the papers rustling in her trembling hands. He said he'd gotten a promotion, a bonus, that business was good." Business was good, all right. The business of robbing his dying father. The sob that escaped her was raw, primal, the sound of a world collapsing. I should have felt guilty for causing it. Instead, I felt satisfied. Justice often required innocent casualties. Sarah had enjoyed the fruits of theft, even unknowingly. Now she'd pay the price of knowledge. "What do you want me to do?" she asked after the crying stopped. "I want you to help me give him a choice. The same choice he gave me when he decided my life's work was his inheritance." I explained the plan. How we'd set up a camera in their home office. How she'd confront him with the evidence when I gave her the signal. How his reaction would determine whether this stayed between us or went public. How he could either confess and try to make amends or face the consequences of discovery. "This will destroy our marriage," she said. "Your marriage was already destroyed, Sarah. You just didn't know it yet." She left with the camera and a promise to call me when it was installed. She also left with the knowledge that her husband was a thief, her lifestyle was a lie, and her father-in-law was orchestrating a revenge that would tear her family apart. But she'd agreed to help, because once you know the truth about someone's character, you can't unknow it. Once you understand you've been living a lie, the lie becomes unbearable. Michael arrived for his daily visit at exactly 8 p.m. Same routine, same false concern. But tonight I watched him differently, studied his movements like a scientist observing a specimen, noted how he avoided direct eye contact when discussing money, how his voice changed slightly when he mentioned taking care of things after my death. "Dad, you seem different tonight, more alert." "I'm feeling stronger," I said, "like I'm finally ready to face what's coming." He smiled, probably thinking I was accepting my fate. He had no idea I was accepting his. Is there anything more dangerous than a man who has nothing left to lose except the opportunity for justice? And is there anything more satisfying than watching someone who betrayed your trust walk blindly toward their own reckoning? Saturday, 11:47 p.m., Sarah's living room. The call came at exactly the time I'd predicted. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "He's here. He's looking at the statements." Through the phone, I could hear the muffled sounds of an argument beginning, the first honest conversation their marriage had probably had in months. I'd positioned myself carefully for this call. Sitting up in bed, pain medication refused, so my mind would be sharp. The recording app on my phone activated. Everything Michael was about to say would be preserved, cataloged, prepared for the next phase of his destruction. "Put him on the phone," I told Sarah when the shouting reached its peak. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Then Michael's voice, no longer gentle or caring. "You manipulative bastard." "Hello, son. I see you've discovered your credit limit. This is what you do? Set traps for your own family? Use my wife against me?" "I learned from the best. You've been setting traps for months, Michael. Every visit, every 'I love you, Dad,' every concerned question about my funeral arrangements, all while you were robbing me blind." His breathing was heavy, angry. The mask had finally fallen completely. "You're dying anyway. What did you need that money for?" There it was, the truth he'd been carrying all along. In Michael's mind, dying people forfeit their right to their own possessions. Death negates ownership, makes theft into inheritance acceleration. "I needed it to see who you really were," I said. "Turns out I raised a thief and a liar. Congratulations on exceeding my lowest expectations." "Sarah, hang up the phone." "No." Sarah's voice was stronger now, steadied by anger. "I want to hear this. I want to hear you explain how you justified this to yourself." The argument that followed was everything I'd hoped for and worse than I'd imagined. Michael defended his theft as practical planning, claimed he'd have spent the money better than a dead man, accused me of emotional manipulation and Sarah of betrayal. He threatened to leave her, to take their children, to expose my vindictive games to everyone who would listen. But he never apologized, never showed remorse, never acknowledged that stealing from his dying father might have been wrong. Instead, he doubled down, blamed everyone but himself, and revealed exactly the kind of man he'd become. "Here's what's going to happen," I said when his tirade finally exhausted itself. "You have 72 hours to return every penny you stole. Every single penny, plus interest. Or what? Or everyone finds out who you really are. your colleagues, your friends, your children when they're old enough to understand. I'll make sure the story follows you forever. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Every transaction you authorized is documented. Every purchase you made is recorded. And now, thanks to tonight's conversation, I have your confession on tape. You admitted to everything, Michael, in your wife's living room with both of us as witnesses. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, I hate you. I know, but here's the difference between us. I hate what you've become, not who you are. You hate me for existing long enough to catch you. He did hang up then. Sarah came back on the line, crying again, but with a different quality now. Relief mixed with devastation. The relief of finally knowing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait. Either he pays me back and proves he has some decency left, or he confirms he's exactly the man we both discovered tonight." I knew which choice he'd make. Michael had shown me his character repeatedly over the past 3 weeks. Tonight had just been the final confirmation. But hope dies hard in a father's heart, even when that heart is failing. Maybe, just maybe, facing the consequences of his actions would shock him back into the sun I'd raised. Maybe pigs would fly too. Tuesday, 6 p.m., 72 hours later. The money never came. Instead, Michael sent lawyers. His message was clear. He'd rather fight me in court than admit he was wrong. Rather destroy what remained of our relationship than show an ounce of remorse. The son I'd raised to take responsibility for his actions had chosen to lawyer up instead. The legal papers accused me of elder manipulation, emotional abuse, and attempting extortion. My own son was claiming I was mentally incompetent due to my illness and medication. According to his lawyers, the man who'd worked construction for 43 years and saved $180,000 was suddenly too addled to manage his own finances. The irony was breathtaking. He'd stolen my money, then hired lawyers to claim I was too confused to know it had been stolen. It was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and memories. But Michael had made a crucial error. He'd assumed I was fighting alone. The phone call to Channel 7 News was surprisingly easy. Local television loves family drama, especially when it involves theft, betrayal, and dying parents. The producer I spoke with practically salivated at the story details. A prominent local businessman stealing from his cancer-stricken father while visiting him daily in the hospital? It was ratings gold. "We'll need documentation," she said. "I have bank statements, recorded phone calls, and a witness who's willing to go on camera." Sarah had agreed to the interview after Michael served me with papers. Seeing him attack his dying father through lawyers had been the final straw. Whatever love she'd felt for her husband had been replaced by disgust and a desire for justice. The meeting with Michael's employer was scheduled for Thursday. I'd requested it directly with the company president, a man I'd known peripherally through construction projects over the years. Frank Martinez ran his architecture firm with old-school values: integrity, family loyalty, treating people right. He'll be very interested to know that his senior project manager was stealing from his dying father. Michael called Tuesday night, after his lawyers had informed him about the news interview and the meeting with his boss. "Dad, please, can we talk about this like adults? I tried that 72 hours ago. You chose lawyers instead." I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. You meant every word, and your actions proved it. What do you want from me? What will it take to stop this? The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? My money back, obviously. An apology, certainly. But deeper than that, I wanted my son back. The boy who used to climb into my lap and tell me about his day. The teenager who'd worked construction summers and complained about how hard the work was. The young man who'd hugged me at his college graduation and thanked me for everything I'd sacrificed. But that person was gone. Had maybe never existed, except in my imagination. The man on the phone was a stranger who'd calculated that his father's death was worth $180,000 in immediate cash flow. "I want you to face the consequences of your choices," I said finally. "I want you to experience what it feels like when the people you trust most betray you. I want you to understand that actions have prices, and some prices can't be bargained away. You're destroying my life." "No, Michael, you destroyed your life. I'm just making sure everyone can see the wreckage." Did I still love him, even as I orchestrated his downfall? Or had love transformed into something else entirely, a twisted need for justice that could only be satisfied by watching him lose everything he'd stolen from me? Thursday, 5 p.m., Channel 7 News Studio. The makeup artist dabbed powder under my eyes, trying to hide the exhaustion that came with dying and plotting revenge simultaneously. "You're very brave for doing this," she said softly. I wanted to tell her that bravery had nothing to do with it. This was about justice, about ensuring that theft had consequences, about making sure Michael's story followed him forever. "Mr. Mitchell, tell us what happened when you discovered your life savings were gone," the reporter began. The story spilled out of me like poison being drawn from a wound. Every detail, every transaction, every visit from Michael while he was stealing from me. The way he'd held my hand and spoken of love while calculating his next withdrawal. How he'd asked about funeral arrangements while spending the money meant to pay for them. Sarah sat beside me, composed but clearly devastated. When asked about her role, she spoke with quiet dignity. "I was unknowingly living off stolen money. When I found out, I had to choose between protecting my husband's lies or supporting what was right. I chose what was right." "And your husband's response when confronted with the evidence?" "He never apologized, never showed remorse. He hired lawyers to claim his dying father was mentally incompetent rather than admit what he'd done." The interview lasted 40 minutes, but felt like 40 seconds. Once it started, I couldn't stop talking. Months of suppressed rage poured out in measured, careful words. Every injustice detailed, every betrayal cataloged, every stolen dollar accounted for. By the time we finished taping, my phone had 17 missed calls, all from Michael. The story went viral before I made it back to the hospital. Social media exploded with outrage, support, and commentary. #Deathbed theft became a trending hashtag. Michael's photo appeared on news sites alongside headlines like "Son Steals from Dying Father" and "The Ultimate Betrayal." His employer called within hours. Frank Martinez was brief and professional. "Robert, I'm sorry for what you're going through. Michael has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of these allegations. If they're substantiated, his employment will be terminated immediately." Michael's frantic voicemails ranged from pleading to threatening to completely hysterical. In one, he sobbed that I was ruining his life. In another, he screamed that he'd never forgive me. In the final one, recorded at 2 a.m., he simply said, "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything." But he still hadn't apologized, still hadn't acknowledged wrongdoing, still hadn't offered to return the money. Even facing complete social and professional destruction, Michael remained defiant. The next morning brought more calls. Reporters wanting follow-up interviews, lawyers offering to represent me pro bono, support groups for families dealing with financial elder abuse, people sharing their own stories of betrayal and theft. I'd become the poster child for family betrayal, the symbol of what happens when trust gets weaponized against the vulnerable. It wasn't a role I'd sought, but I found myself oddly suited for it. Sarah visited that afternoon, her eyes red from crying. "He's gone," she said, "took some clothes and left. Said he couldn't show his face anywhere in town." "I'm sorry," I said. And surprisingly, I meant it. "No, you're not, and neither am I, not anymore." She was right. The sorry I felt wasn't for Michael's consequences. It was for the son I'd lost long before any of this began. The son who'd been replaced by a thief so gradually that I'd missed the transformation until it was complete. The Michael I'd raised would never have stolen from anyone, let alone his dying father. The Michael I'd raised would have apologized immediately and worked triple shifts to pay back every penny. But that Michael was gone. Had been gone for years, probably. I'd just been too blinded by fatherly love to see it. Now everyone could see exactly who he'd become, and that visibility was its own form of justice. Friday, 9:30 a.m. The meeting that ended everything. Frank Martinez's office hadn't changed much since I'd last been there 15 years ago. Same oak desk, same family photos, same American flag in the corner. But the man behind the desk looked older, worn down by decades of managing people and their inevitable disappointments. Today, he was dealing with the biggest disappointment of all. "Robert, I've reviewed everything you've provided. The bank statements, the timeline, your recorded conversations." Frank's voice carried the weight of disappointment. "I've also spoken with Sarah, and her account corroborates every detail." Michael sat in the chair beside me, no longer the confident professional who'd stolen my money. He looked diminished, cornered, finally understanding that consequences were real and unavoidable. For the first time in months, I almost felt sorry for him. "Michael, I need to hear your side of this," Frank continued. "My father is dying and not thinking clearly. The medications, the stress of his diagnosis, he's not processing things rationally. I was managing his finances as his power of attorney, making decisions he couldn't make himself. Even now, even with overwhelming evidence against him, Michael was lying. Not just to Frank, but to himself. He'd constructed a narrative where theft became financial management, where betrayal became caregiving, where stealing from his dying father was actually helping him. "The Tesla you purchased," Frank said, consulting his notes, "how was that managing your father's finances?" He wanted me to have reliable transportation, to visit him more easily. For $45,000 when he was worried about medical bills? It was an investment. Cars hold value. The lies were becoming more elaborate, more desperate. I watched my son spin fiction in real time, trying to rewrite history even as it was being documented. Part of me admired his creativity. The larger part was appalled by his complete inability to acknowledge reality. "Michael," I said quietly, "just tell the truth. For once in your life, just tell the truth." He turned to look at me then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the real Michael underneath all the lies and justifications. Something desperate and lost, and maybe even sorry. But it passed so quickly I might have imagined it. The truth is that my father has turned into a vindictive old man who can't accept that he's dying. He's using his last weeks to destroy his family because he's angry at the world. And there it was, Michael's final position. I was the villain in his story, the unreasonable father who couldn't understand that dying meant forfeiting all rights to money, dignity, and respect. He wasn't a thief. He was a victim of his father's irrationality. Frank's expression said everything about how that defense was being received. "Michael, your employment with this firm is terminated immediately. You'll be escorted out of the building, and all company property must be returned by end of business today." "This is insane. You're firing me based on a family dispute." "I'm firing you because you've demonstrated a fundamental lack of integrity. If you can steal from your dying father, I can't trust you with client funds, project budgets, or anything else that requires ethical behavior." The security escort was almost anticlimactic. Michael gathered his personal items into a cardboard box while 2 guards watched. No dramatic speeches, no final confrontations. Just a man who'd made terrible choices facing their inevitable conclusion. As they walked him out, he stopped beside my chair. "I hope destroying me was worth it, Dad." "I didn't destroy you, Michael. I just made sure everyone could see what you'd already become." He left without another word. Through Frank's office window, I watched him load his box into the Tesla, my Tesla, paid for with my money, and drive away. It was probably the last time I'd ever see him. The victory felt hollow. I'd gotten justice, exposed the truth, ensured that Michael faced consequences for his actions. But I'd also lost my son forever. Not just the thief he'd become, but any possibility of the man he might have been. Some prices are paid by everyone involved, even the winners. Sunday, 3:22 p.m., room 314, alone with my choices. The flowers started arriving Saturday morning. Dozens of arrangements from strangers who'd seen the news story and wanted to express support. "For a brave father. Justice served. Thinking of you." Each card was a small vindication, confirmation that I'd done the right thing. So why did I feel so empty? Sarah brought the grandchildren one last time. Emma, 7 years old, and Jake, barely 4. They didn't understand why Mommy was crying or why Daddy wasn't living at home anymore. They just knew that Grandpa was sick, and somehow everyone was sad about more than just that. "Why is Daddy in trouble?" Emma asked, with the devastating directness of childhood. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her father is a thief? That the money paying for her toys and clothes and ballet lessons was stolen from her dying grandfather? That her family was built on lies and betrayal? "Sometimes adults make bad choices," I said. "And when they do, there are consequences. Is Daddy a bad person?" The question hit me harder than any diagnosis, any bank statement, any betrayal. Was Michael a bad person? Or was he a good person who'd made terrible choices? Was there even a difference anymore? "Your daddy did something wrong," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean he's all bad. People are complicated." It was the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. Sarah squeezed my hand as they left. "I'm taking the kids to my sister's in Denver, starting over. I can't stay here where everyone knows." Another casualty of Michael's choices. His wife and children, forced to relocate and rebuild because their husband and father couldn't resist stealing from his dying parent. The ripple effects of betrayal spread far beyond the original wound. The detective who'd taken my statement stopped by Sunday evening. Michael was being charged with elder financial abuse, theft, and fraud. If convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison. The case was solid, she said. Michael's recorded confessions, the documented transactions, Sarah's testimony, it was prosecutorial gold. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked. I'd been dreading this moment. Criminal charges meant Michael wouldn't just lose his job and reputation, he'd lose his freedom. His children would grow up knowing their father was a convicted felon. The stigma would follow him forever. But justice wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about ensuring that stealing from vulnerable elderly people carried real consequences. If I let Michael escape criminal prosecution, what message did that send to other potential thieves? "Yes," I said. "Press charges." That night, I called my brother David in Phoenix. We hadn't spoken in months. My illness had made me withdraw from everyone except Michael. Now I needed to hear a voice that remembered who I used to be before cancer and betrayal changed me. "Jesus, Bobby, I saw you on the news. Is it all true?" Every word. "I can't believe Michael would do that. That sweet kid who used to help you in the workshop?" "That kid died somewhere along the way. I just didn't notice until it was too late." We talked for an hour. David shared memories of Michael as a child, curious, affectionate, eager to please. We tried to pinpoint when he'd changed, when entitlement had replaced gratitude, when manipulation had replaced honesty. But childhoods are complex, and the seeds of adult character are often invisible until they bloom. "Do you regret it?" David asked finally. "Going public, I mean." I considered the question seriously. Did I regret destroying my son's life? Did I regret choosing justice over family loyalty? Did I regret burning down our relationship to prove a point about consequences? I regret that it was necessary, but no, I don't regret doing it. Some truths are too important to keep hidden, even when revealing them destroys everything you've built. Tuesday, 11:45 a.m. The last conversation. I didn't expect to see him again. After the charges were filed, after his world collapsed completely, I assumed Michael would disappear into whatever hole people crawl into when their lives implode. But there he was in my doorway, looking 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. "Dad," his voice was barely a whisper. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung loose on his diminished frame. This was what complete destruction looked like on a human face. "Michael." I didn't invite him in, but I didn't call security either. After everything we'd been through, we deserved one final conversation. He approached my bed carefully, like I might explode if he moved too quickly. "I know you probably don't want to see me." "I don't know what I want anymore." He sat in the visitor's chair, the same chair where he'd performed his caring son routine while robbing me blind. But this time was different. The mask was completely gone, leaving only raw honesty and devastating regret. "I'm sorry." The words came out broken, jagged with genuine pain. "I'm so fucking sorry, Dad, for all of it. For stealing from you, for lying to you, for betraying everything you taught me about right and wrong." It was the apology I'd waited months to hear, but hearing it now, with his life already destroyed and criminal charges pending, it felt almost meaningless. Sorry couldn't undo the theft, couldn't rebuild trust, couldn't resurrect the relationship we'd murdered together. "Why?" I asked. "Just tell me why you did it." He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with self-loathing. "Because I convinced myself you were already gone. The cancer, the prognosis, in my mind, you were already dead. And dead people don't need money." "But I wasn't dead." "No, you weren't, but I needed you to be, because it made the stealing easier to justify." The honesty was brutal, but it was the first real truth he'd told me in months. Michael had needed me to be gone to make his theft morally acceptable. So he decided I was gone, even while I was still breathing, still conscious, still trusting him with everything I had. "I started small," he continued, "just a few hundred for groceries when Sarah lost her job. Then a little more for car repairs. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back when things got better. But things never got better, and the amounts got bigger. And somewhere along the way, I stopped planning to pay it back. Because I was dying anyway. Because you were dying anyway." He looked up at me then, tears streaming down his face. "I turned you into a dying man in my head so I could steal from you with a clear conscience. I killed you emotionally before the cancer could kill you physically." The explanation was horrifying in its logic. Michael hadn't just stolen my money, he'd stolen my life, my personhood, my right to exist in his moral calculations. I'd become a non-person, a soon-to-be corpse whose resources were available for redistribution. The worst part is, I enjoyed it. The Tesla, the watches, the vacations. I enjoyed spending your money while you were dying. What kind of person does that make me? "A person I don't recognize," I said truthfully. "I know. I don't recognize me either." We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside my window, life continued normally. Cars passing, people walking, the world spinning on as if my family hadn't just confessed to murdering each other emotionally. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you face the consequences. Prison, probably. Your children growing up knowing their father is a convicted felon. Starting over with nothing, just like you left me. I deserve all of that." "Yes, you do. Do you forgive me?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us could cross. Did I forgive him? Could I forgive him? Should I forgive him? "I forgive the son I raised," I said slowly. "I can't forgive the man you became." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Maybe it was the only honest answer left between us. "I love you, Dad. I know I have no right to say that anymore, but I do. I love you too, Michael. But love isn't enough to fix what you broke." He stood to leave, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth, destroying me didn't make you the bad guy in this story. I was already destroyed. You just made it visible." After he left, I realized that revenge wasn't about making the other person suffer. It was about making them see themselves clearly, without the lies and justifications they'd built to protect their self-image. Michael finally saw himself as he truly was, and that vision would torment him far longer than any punishment I could devise. Justice, it turned out, was just another word for unavoidable truth. Thursday, 4:17 p.m., the final accounting. Dr. Harrison delivered the news with practiced gentleness. I had days, not weeks. The cancer had accelerated, spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Maybe the stress of the past month had weakened my already compromised system. Maybe some bodies are only designed to handle so much betrayal before they simply surrender. I'd accomplished what I set out to do. Michael faced criminal charges. His theft was public knowledge. The money was being recovered through asset seizure. Justice had been served as completely as any dying man could hope for. But lying here now, feeling my strength ebb with each labored breath, I wondered if justice was worth the cost. I'd destroyed my relationship with my son to prove a point about consequences. I'd chosen public vindication over private reconciliation. I'd let my need for revenge consume the last weeks of my life. Sarah visited one final time, bringing Emma and Jake to say goodbye. The children didn't understand death any better than they understood theft, but they sensed the gravity of the moment. They hugged me carefully, like I might break if they squeezed too hard. "Will you watch over us from heaven, Grandpa?" Emma asked. "Every day," I promised. After they left, I wrote letters. To my brother David, thanking him for 40 years of friendship. To Patricia, my lawyer, expressing gratitude for her help seeking justice. To the strangers who'd sent flowers and support, letting them know their kindness had mattered. I didn't write to Michael. What was left to say? We'd said everything that could be said, revealed every truth that could be revealed. Our story was complete, even if neither of us liked the ending. The news came Wednesday evening. Michael had accepted a plea deal. 3 years in minimum security prison, full restitution of stolen funds, 5 years probation. He'll serve his time and emerge into a world where everyone knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. His children would grow up with that knowledge. His future relationships would be built on that foundation. Every job application, every background check, every attempt to rebuild his life would be shadowed by the theft that defined him. Was that justice? Or was it simply revenge with a legal framework? Thursday afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Frank Martinez from Michael's former employer, along with 2 colleagues I'd worked with decades ago. They'd come to pay respects to a man they remembered as honest, hard-working, someone who'd kept his word and treated people fairly. "Robert, I want you to know that what you did took courage," Frank said. "Standing up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." But had it taken courage? Or had it taken something darker, a dying man's need to burn down the world rather than leave it peacefully? I'd told myself this was about justice, about consequences, about teaching final lessons. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just a father's broken heart expressing itself through calculated destruction. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Michael had stolen from me, betrayed my trust, treated my dying body as an obstacle to his inheritance. Those actions demanded consequences. But my response had been designed not just to recover money or seek justice, but to maximize his suffering. I'd wanted him to lose everything because he'd taken everything from me. Not just money, but trust, love, the belief that the person I'd raised had any decency left. The financial theft was just the visible symptom of a deeper betrayal that had been years in the making. As darkness fell outside my window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper calm that comes with accepting what you've done and who you've become. I'd been a good father for 38 years and a terrible one for the last few weeks. I'd built up my son with decades of love and torn him down with weeks of calculated exposure. I'd chosen justice over mercy, consequences over forgiveness, truth over family harmony. Maybe that made me a monster. Maybe it made me a hero. Maybe it just made me human, flawed, complex, capable of both tremendous love and devastating cruelty, sometimes toward the same person. The heart monitor's steady beeping was slowing, matching the rhythm of my failing body. Soon, this would all be over. Michael would serve his sentence, rebuild his life, carry the weight of our final weeks forever. His children would grow up knowing their grandfather died angry at their father, that family love hadn't been strong enough to survive betrayal. But they'd also grow up knowing that actions have consequences, that stealing from vulnerable people is wrong, that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. Maybe that lesson would serve them better than the alternative, a family secret that taught them theft was acceptable if the victim was dying. In the end, I'd given Michael the same thing my father had given me, an understanding that the world had rules, and breaking those rules carried a price. The price had been higher than either of us anticipated, but the lesson was complete. Some fathers leave their children money, others leave wisdom. I'd tried to leave both, but ultimately settled for teaching the most important lesson of all. Who you choose to become matters more than what you stand to inherit. Whether Michael learned that lesson or not was up to him now. My part in his story was over. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, if you've felt the weight of betrayal and the complexity of justice, then you understand that some stories don't have happy endings. They just have true ones. Hit that like button if you believe consequences matter, even when they hurt everyone involved. Share this if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right. And subscribe, because the most important stories are often the most painful ones to tell. Sometimes love means holding people accountable, even when it destroys the very relationship you're trying to protect. Especially then.